Hello, and welcome to God in Our City, the Daily Edition. Your host and Bible teacher is Pastor Dave Watson. Pastor Dave has been the pastor of Calvary Chapel on Staten Island for 35 years. In addition, he is the co-founder and president of the New York Institute for Biblical Studies. To receive a special downloadable gift from Pastor Dave, please go to calvarychapelsi.org/GIOC. That's calvarychapelsi.org/GIOC. Now here's Pastor Dave and our show.
Hi, I am Pastor Dave Watson. Welcome to God in Our City, the Daily Edition. We hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a good new year. We are on the 21st of January. And those of you who are with us in our 21 days of prayer, you should actually be, making your way through the book, and you should be on chapter 16 of 21 Keys to Answered Prayer by our good friend, Dr. Dave Earley. And we hope that we've got a lot of you who are doing that with us. It's an incredible opportunity to pray, to read, and every morning at 8 o'clock, our ministry team releases another video of themselves, and they're actually, right there talking about the chapter of the day. So please take advantage of all of that on Facebook and YouTube. We, of course, are right here on 570 WMCA, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. And we always like to give something away free. So we have a free download at calvarychapelsi.org/GIOC, calvarychapelsi.org/GIOC. If you go there, I preached a message recently on what has been called the Lord's Prayer. Might be better described as the disciples' prayer is not simply the Our Father, but I like to call the model prayer. I preached a message on that I think you'll enjoy, and there's a free download of that at calvarychapelsi.org/GIOC. And while you're there, please consider making a donation to God in Our City. Every donation, each donation is greatly, greatly appreciated. Helps us to be on the air, not just now, but into the future. However, if you are able to give us $50 or more, we will send out to you 21 Keys to Answered Prayer, Dave Earley's book, as our way of saying thank you. We'll just send you that book. We would love you to have that. If you're able to give us $100 and more, we'll send you both that book. And we have something we call the God in Our City New Testament. It is the best New Testament with Psalms and Proverbs in the ESV version that I found, in terms of being small and compact and good. And it has the God in Our City logo on it. And again, that's something we would love for you to have. So please, considering making a donation of $100 more, we'll send you both right away. Well, that's enough of preliminaries. I have one of my favorite people in the world with us today, and I'm going to bring him up right now. This is Dr. Lawrence Taylor. Dr. Taylor, we are so glad you are with us.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Dr. Taylor and I have known each other for quite some time, though we are both still very young men. We're still very young men, more or less. And Dr. Taylor teaches in our Bible Institute. That's New York Institute for Biblical Studies. If you're interested in learning more about NYIBS, simply go to nyibs.net, nyibs.net. He's going to be talking about the Apostle Paul in our upcoming spring semester. And we would love to have you to be part of his class. I'm going to be teaching on the life of Christ. Hey, who's teaching on the better guy, Dr. Taylor? But
of course you are.
But he and I enjoy our ministry doing that. nyibs.net, nyibs.net. I know that will be a blessing. You just check it out. See what our offerings are. You'll find that we're close, we're caring, and we're cost effective. And most of our courses, mine and Dr. Taylor's both, are available virtually, and that kind of makes it easy. You can come home from work, eat your meal, and then sit under some amazing Bible teaching. I brought Dr. Taylor on today to talk about a particular set of scriptures, a particular set of verses, and they're found in Philippians chapter 4, verses really 6 through 9. I brought Dr. Taylor in because of his expertise in exegesis, and we are one day into a new presidency, and I don't think it would matter who's president, but we tend to get a little bit anxious about the future. So I'm going to read from my incredible New Testament the words of Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 through 9, and then Dr. Taylor and I are going to discuss these incredible verses. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things, which you have learned and received and heard and seen in me. Practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. Those are familiar verses to a lot of people, aren't they, Dr. Taylor?
Yeah, I believe so. And they're not really that easy to understand.
Now, the first law of interpretation, or close to the first law, is context, right?
That's right. Right. That's very important.
What context, what insights can you give us to the context of these particular verses?
Well, I believe it certainly reflects what some scholars have said, that this is a letter of friendship. And the Apostle Paul is addressing a controversial issue in the church. I mean, that was the nature of these epistles. They were occasional letters. They were written to address problems in the church.
What problems are they having there at Philippi? Paul, founds that church in Acts chapter 16. He's got skin in the game, literally, because they've whipped his back, a bear. But what problems now have arisen in this church?
Well, I think it seems to be the problem of a lack of unity. He attempts to encourage this congregation to unite by serving with humility. First example that he uses is Christ himself in chapter 2, how Christ gave up his prerogatives of glory and came down to earth to die as a servant and to die an ignominious death, the death of the cross. So he says, well, that's an example of humility. And then he uses, in that same chapter, beginning at verse 19, Timothy. And then another example he uses is a guy that we don't know much about, Epaphroditus.
Yes.
Yeah, and he shows how he served, and he was from the city of Philippi. He belonged to this church. He was a Philippian, and how he almost lost his life in service for Christ. And then he uses himself. That is, Paul uses himself as an example of humility. But there's something that reflects the disunity in the church, and that's, you see in the chapter we're looking at, and it's with two women, Euodia and Syntyche.
You don't know you have problems in the church until you have women problems in the church, Dr. Taylor.
Well, you said that, not me.
And where is Paul as he writes this letter?
Okay, good. So he's in prison now. That's been, it's been debated what prison he's in. Is he in a Roman prison? Is he in some other prison? I think the answer would be that he's in a Roman prison. He makes a reference in chapter 1 to the Praetorian Guard, which sort of indicates that this is a Roman prison that he's in.
He's preached the gospel to the whole Praetorian Guard.
Yes. So that's an indication of where he is, right? And how many times was Paul in prison? Nobody really knows that. He mentions in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, in prison frequent. Okay, so
He had a good lawyer, always down there bailing him out. Actually, he didn't. A lot of times it seems as though no one forsook him. When we start reading the text, and I said, don't be anxious. Is that the best phraseology? Don't be anxious. Is that exactly what he's saying?
Well, I think the word means be double thinking or divided in your thoughts. That's the Greek word means. Some go this way and go that way. And some would prefer the word worry. Stop worrying.
Stop worrying. And I have always, in my reading, I've always translated it to stop worrying rather than don't be anxious. Isn't that perhaps a better way to say it? Stop worrying.
Yeah, it's the same. In fact, this expression is almost exactly the same that we see in the Gospel of Matthew when in chapter 6, when Jesus says, "Don't worry."
So yes, stop it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and by the way, I'm glad you pointed that out, because he uses a whole bunch of imperatives here, commands that we shouldn't miss. I mean, you when he says in verse 4, rejoice. Well, that's a command.
Not an option.
Yes.
Not a suggestion.
Yes, and what's interesting is that the word for rejoice in Greek, if you look at the Greek text, it's the very first word in that verse and the very last word in that verse.
So it'd be equivalent to putting it in bold and underlining it.
Yes. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. All right. Now, if you look at his circumstances, say, well, what's he so happy about? I mean, Paul was not certain whether this imprisonment would lead to his death.
Sometime or another, it was going to wind up leading to his death, right?
Yes. That's
and he
right.
said in chapter 1, I have a desire to depart, be with Christ, which is far better.
That is right.
Now Martha is, I think the same wording is used with Martha in chapter 10 of Luke, when it says Martha was anxious about many things. It's the same idea. You're carried here, you're carried there, you're carried everywhere.
Yeah, that's right. You're in, well, your mind is going everywhere. That's what he's saying, because you're being distracted.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was certainly the case of Martha, right? She was certainly distracted.
Now, he says, but there in verse 6. Speak to the nature of that particular word, but. There's a couple ways you can say but in the Greek language, isn't there?
Yeah, yes. There's a particle you could use, which is de, day, and that's not as strong as the one that he uses here. The adversative conjunction that he uses here is a lot stronger.
So stop being anxious, stop having your mind go everywhere, but
that's right.
But and he says in all things. Does he really mean that?
I believe so. Yeah, I mean that's. I, I believe there are those who say, "Well, he can't really mean in everything," but I looked up the word in all things, and all means all.
And that's all means.
That's all means. That's right.
all without all without exception. Now you and I don't hold to replacement theology, but could we say that there's some replacement idea here? Stop being anxious, but replace it with
Yeah,
something
I
else.
think that's the idea. Yes, I mean, look, he just wrote about these women, Euodia and Syntyche, who obviously had some real negative. Their fight, the conflict between these two women, caused a great deal of problems in the congregation. He calls for the Philippians to help these women out. He calls for somebody we don't know. Okay, I mean, he doesn't identify the person. He just refers to this person as a companion, indeed, true companion, as you also to help these women. Okay, so he may have been from the Church of Philippi, maybe he wasn't, maybe Paul sent him there, who knows? But he tells them to please help these women out in this problem that they're having, because it's having such a negative impact on the entire congregation. And he cares for these women.
Yes, they're fellow servants in the Lord, right?
He uses pretty strong word there for in verse 3 when he describes them. Fellow, the New American Standard says fellow workers. So same kind of terminology he uses to describe Timothy and Titus and some of the other men. So he says these are fellow workers. And he certainly knows that they're saved. Their names in the book of life. So,
amen.
Yeah. But because of whatever it was, we don't know the problem. He goes on to say, "Let your humility or your gentleness." I think the word is better translated in verse 5. Let your gentleness be made known to everyone.
The Lord is near.
Yeah, now that could be that the Lord is near, that is, he's coming soon, or it could be, as I understand it, you may be in a bad situation, but just remember, God is always near you. He's close to you.
And that gives us a reason not to be worrying about anything.
That's right.
Now he uses a bunch of different words here for prayer.
Yeah.
But in everything, by means of prayer, by means of supplication, with thanksgiving, make your requests known to the one true God. Can you give us I mean, for many of us, prayer is prayer. Why does he use three different terms for prayer and throw in a thanksgiving?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think the first word that he uses for prayer is just a general word for prayer. Yeah, so and everything in prayer. All right, and then the other word means request, supplication.
Okay,
and he means within your prayer, supplication is fine. Oftentimes that's looked down upon. Why people sometimes feel guilty when they ask God for things.
But we are supplicants, and he is the king. So we need to ask him things.
Someone, I didn't do the study. So someone did a study of the prayers in the Bible, and said that 85% of the prayers in the Bible is the supplicant requesting something from God.
I think in my prayer life it might be closer to 95%, Dr. Taylor, but
yes. So that's what we do.
So I'm going to replace the worry with this constant praying, this constant supplicating, this constant asking, and I'm going to put thanksgiving with it. And he says in verse 7 that something happens because of this.
That's right.
The peace of God, and the peace of God is described there uniquely. Give us some insight on what it means by the peace of God that surpasses all understanding. I'm not sure I quite grasp what that means.
All right. Well, I want you to note something in verse 7. In verse 7, in the New American Standard, it correctly starts off with "and."
Yes.
Now, that's a special kind of construction in Greek, which is parataxis, but the point is that it's connecting those thoughts, what we have in verse 6, that your prayer will result in you receiving the peace of God. So
the peace of God.
Yeah, that's right. Now, the peace of God is, as I often point out, is different from peace with God.
That's right.
Yeah.
Peace with God is because we're justified by faith, Romans tells us.
That's right. That means the war is over between you and God. You're no longer enemies. But this is not the same. This is the peace of God.
Peace of God. And it surpasses all mind or all understanding. What does that mean?
Well, if you're in a state of worry, okay, because let's not forget what he said in verse 6. You're constantly worrying. He says, "Stop worrying." That's an imperative. And what's the solution for that prayer? And when you pray, there is something that happens. There is a result. That result will be a sense of tranquility, a sense that everything is going to be all right. And that's called the peace of God. And it's active. Note how active it is here, because he says in verse 7, "In the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension," is what the peace will do. It will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Now, when he says it will guard, he's referring to the peace of God. That's the subject in it. So what does the peace of God? It puts like a military garrison around your heart and mind to protect you from those thoughts that will cause you to have anxiety or to worry.
Wow. Believe it or not, Dr. Taylor, we are out of time.
Wow.
This was amazing. I hope that you folks at home enjoyed this. And from this text, you took the fact that Paul was saying you ought to have peace with God, and you can have that, and it will surpass all your ability to comprehend and understand what's going on. Our God is that amazing. Thank you again for listening to God in Our City. It's our prayer that our show has been a tremendous blessing to you. Please go to calvarychapelsi.org/GIOC, calvarychapelsi.org/GIOC. Thanks again for listening. God bless.
Thanks for listening to God in Our City with your host, Pastor Dave Watson. We hope the show was a blessing to you. Again, to receive a downloadable gift from Pastor Dave, go to calvarychapelsi.org/GIOC. That's calvarychapelsi.org/GIOC. Please check out Pastor Dave's blog at nycshepherd.com. That's nycshepherd.com. Please invite a friend and join us every weekday for another edition of God in Our City.